Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. The Indian occupying forces have martyred 2 civilians and injured another in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youth were targeted during a cordon and search operation in the Pulwama district. Meanwhile, a vehicle of Indian forces has trampled an elderly man to death in the Kulgam district. In another incident, 4 civilians were injured in a grenade blast in Singhpora area of the Baramulla district. The global number of coronavirus cases has topped 68 million, while the death toll has surged to 1.55 million. The infections tally in the U.S. has crossed 15 million, with over 286,000 deaths. In India, the virus has claimed more than 141,000 lives and infected over 9.74 million people. Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported nearly 3,000 new cases and 60 deaths in a day, with the tally crossing 8,500. The Saudi-led military coalition says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Saudi media quoted a coalition spokesperson as saying that the drone was aimed at the kingdom's civilian population. Indonesians, mostly in PPEs, are voting to elect local and regional leaders across 270 regions of the archipelago. 1/3 of the country's population, comprising over 100 million people, is eligible to vote. Voters will also choose governors in 9 out of the country's 34 provinces. And in football, Juventus have outclassed Barcelona 3-0 in their UEFA Champions League encounter at Camp Nou. Cristiano Ronaldo scored a brace to put his club in the top spot of Group G. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. The Indian occupying forces have martyred 2 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youth were targeted during a cordon and search operation in the Pulwama district. 1 person was also injured due to the firing of the occupying troops during the so-called search operation. The operation continued till the last reports came in. Meanwhile, a vehicle of Indian forces has trampled an elderly man to death in the Kulgam district. In another incident, 4 civilians were injured in a grenade blast in Singhpora area of the Baramulla district. And moving on, the global number of coronavirus cases has topped 68 million, while the death toll has surged to 1.55 million. The infections tally in the U.S. has crossed 15 million, with over 286,000 deaths. More in this report.
As the world moves one step closer to administering a COVID-19 vaccine, cases and deaths continue to spike to record highs. Countries are pouring in billions of dollars to become one of the first nations to immunize their populations. Brazil continues to register record high daily deaths every day. The Latin American state signed a letter of intent to procure 70 million doses of Pfizer vaccine, while Mexico is also set to buy 22 million doses from Johnson & Johnson. As cases in Arizona, Alabama, and Ohio skyrocket, the upcoming U.S. administration has introduced a mass vaccination.
This team will help get at the last 100 million COVID-19 vaccine, at least 100 million COVID vaccine shots into the arms of the American people in the first 100 days. 100 million shots in the first 100 days.
However, An international coalition called the People's Vaccine Alliance claims 9 out of 10 people in poor nations can miss out on vaccination because rich countries, home to only 14% of the global population, have hoarded 53% of the total stock of vaccines. Experts say vaccine deployments on nationalistic sentiments can have negative global consequences.
I think also we can't be nationalistic about it because the UK has bought lots of vaccines. We have a great capacity to immunise people. But, if other countries around the world are still crippled from their health systems and economically, that affects us as well. It affects our economy and the health of our population. So we do have work to do on that.
Meanwhile, in India, the virus has claimed more than 141,000 lives and infected over 9.74 million people. Indian officials say if the vaccines are approved over the next few weeks, an estimated 300 million people will be inoculated in the first tranche. Over in South Korea, the Disease Control and Prevention Agency has reported 868 new infections, which is the second highest number of cases in one day.
In Pakistan, 60 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, pushing the death toll to 8,547. The health ministry says nearly 3,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said there are more than 45,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of more than 426,000 countrywide infections, over 372,000 people have recovered. While the Minister for Planning and Development, Asad Umar, says the vaccine will be available in the country in the first quarter of 2021. Umar said it would be provided to health workers and old citizens on a priority basis. Moving on to India, health officers found excessive amounts of lead and nickel in blood samples of patients of a mysterious illness in Andhra Pradesh. At least one person has died. Research by the All India Institute of Medical Sciences team said traces of metals may be the culprit, but public health officials are still searching for a definitive link between all the patients. The state's chief minister says out of 505 people to have been hospitalized, 300 people have been discharged. Patients reported a range of symptoms, including seizures, loss of consciousness, and nausea. The U.S. has imposed terrorism-related sanctions on Iran's ambassador to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Treasury Department said Hassan Irlou works for the overseas wing of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Iran's Al-Mustafa International University was also targeted with sanctions for serving as a platform for Quds Force operations. Iran announced Irlou's arrival in Yemen's Houthi-controlled capital Sana'a in October. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the appointment signals Iran's intent to ramp up support to the Houthis. He said this will further complicate international efforts to reach a negotiated settlement to the conflict. The Saudi-led military coalition says it has destroyed an explosive-laden drone launched by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Saudi media quoted a coalition spokesperson as saying that the drone was aimed at the kingdom's civilian population. Cross-border attacks by Yemeni rebels have escalated since May, when a truce prompted by the coronavirus pandemic expired. Last month, Houthi rebels targeted a petroleum products domestic distribution facility in Jeddah. In 2015, the Arab coalition intervened in Yemen after the Houthis ousted the internationally recognized government from Sana'a. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's leading rival inside his ruling party has announced to part ways from the government. In a statement, Gideon Sa'ar said he is forming his own political party. Gideon Sa'ar said he cannot serve under Netanyahu any longer and will seek the prime minister's post for himself. Sa'ar said Netanyahu mismanaged the health and economic crises stemming from the coronavirus pandemic. He said Netanyahu turned the ruling party Likud into a tool for personal survival at a time when he is on trial for corruption charges. This comes after the Knesset passed a bill to dissolve the parliament, which would end Netanyahu's government. And Turkey has condemned the interception of one of its ships in the Mediterranean by eastern Libyan forces. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry warned of possible reprisal. It said steps to ensure the vessel's smooth journey to western Libya must be taken immediately. The statement added that targeting Turkish interests in Libya will have grave consequences. Ankara said Khalifa Haftar and his militia are continuing their hostilities. Earlier, the Libyan National Army said it had intercepted the ship under a Jamaican flag heading to the port of Misrata. Moving on, Egypt says its armed forces have killed at least 40 terrorists in North Sinai province. The statement said 7 military officers were also killed in an exchange of fire. It said the Air Force destroyed 437 hideouts in the northeast, killing 25 terrorists. The statement added that 15 militants were killed in another operation. The military said it also destroyed arms and ammunition in various raids. Egypt has been fighting a wave of terrorism since the ouster of former President Mohamed Morsi in July 2013. In Iraq, the death toll in the protests against Kurdish authorities has risen to 6. People have taken to the streets against delayed public sector salary payments and pay cuts. The rallies broke out last week in the town of Suleymania. The regional government of Kurdistan has announced a 24-hour travel ban throughout the city as protesters tried to set a police station on fire. The UN office in Iraq condemned the violence and urged the perpetrators to be held accountable. Hundreds of Armenian protesters took to the streets in the capital Yerevan, launching a civil disobedience campaign. The protests erupted after Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan ignored a Tuesday deadline given by the opposition for him to quit. Chanting slogans against Pashinyan, protesters also paralyzed the city's subway. Police detained dozens of demonstrators in a fresh blow to the embattled premier. The influential head of Armenia's Apostolic Church also called for his resignation. The premier has been facing widespread opposition since agreeing to a Moscow-brokered deal with Azerbaijan. Indonesians, mostly clad in PPEs, are voting to elect local and regional leaders across 270 regions of the archipelago. 1/3 of the country's population, comprising over 100 million people, is eligible to vote. Voters will also choose governors in 9 out of the country's 34 provinces. The polls are being held amid the most severe outbreak of COVID-19 in a Southeast Asian country. There's a surge in interest in this year's elections as several candidates come from political families. President Joko Widodo's son and son-in-law are also running for mayor in the cities of Surakarta and Medan. Ethiopia's government has admitted federal troops fired and detained United Nations workers in the conflict-hit Tigray region. Deputy Foreign Minister Redwan Hussein blamed the team for trying to reach areas where they were not supposed to go. He told reporters the UN staffers broke 2 checkpoints and were trying to go through a 3rd when they were fired upon. He said the staffers have since been released. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's office has said it was working with the UN and others to extend humanitarian assistance, but EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell tweeted that full access for humanitarian actors must be guaranteed. And moving on, a brawl broke out in Congo's parliament as rival political groups flung chairs and buckets at each other. Lawmakers came to blows over President Felix Tshisekedi's move to end an alliance with his predecessor, Joseph Kabila. Tshisekedi's supporters hurled chairs, wooden batons, and plastic buckets towards Kabila partisans who threw the objects back. The police eventually broke up the brawl and dispersed the crowd with tear gas. And we'll be back with more news after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will fly to Brussels today for talks with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The two sides are making last-ditch efforts to reach a post-Brexit trade deal. The pair will hold talks over dinner after negotiations between officials ended in a deadlock. Major disagreements remain on fishing rights, business competition rules, and how a deal will be policed. Earlier, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, told ministers he believed a no-deal scenario was now more likely than an agreement. Deepening the gloom, Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin said unless there was a breakthrough soon, EU leaders would have to discuss contingency plans for the economic disruption a no-deal would bring. And 5 rescue personnel have been killed in a helicopter crash in the French Alps. In a tweet, President Emmanuel Macron said one person is still critical after the crash in the Savoy department. Macron said 3 members of the French air rescue and 2 members of a mountain police unit were killed. He said Paris will support the families, friends, and colleagues of these French heroes. Meanwhile, Savoy officials said the pilot was being evacuated in a difficult condition as rescue teams have been unable to reach the site. France's Air Accident Bureau announced it has opened an investigation into the accident. And the International Anti-Corruption Day is being observed today across the world. In a statement, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the COVID-19 crisis has created additional opportunities for corruption. Guterres said the development of vaccines and anti-COVID-19 treatments adds to the risk of bribery and profiteering. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the National Accountability Bureau has been running a week-long awareness campaign to eradicate corruption from the country. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan says developing countries being impoverished by their corrupt elites. The Prime Minister says he welcomes U.S. President-elect Joe Biden's declared intent of a policy targeting dirty money. The UN General Assembly adopted the Convention Against Corruption in 2003, while in December 2005, the Assembly designated the day as Anti-Corruption Day. And moving on, New Zealand is marking 1 year to the White Island disaster. 22 people, mostly tourists, were killed in the volcanic eruption last year. More in the following report.
For the families of the victims of White Island eruption, the last 1 year has been littered with painful milestones. Community leaders gathered in Whakatane, a town of the Bay of Plenty, to mark the anniversary. Survivors, families of the dead, first responders and residents observed a minute of silence.
We also remember our survivors and pray for their healing. For many, this will be a long journey back to good health. And though the scars on your skin may have begun to heal, it will take longer for our hearts and minds to heal. We offer you our love and support.
Earlier, the country's primary regulator indicted 13 parties for not meeting safety obligations in taking tourists to the island. Whakatane Mayor Judy Turner recalled Prime Minister Ardern's remarks.
We'll remember those who have passed. We will think of the survivors, thank those who were responders, acknowledge those who continue to care for and support the injured, and we will recognise the pain and suffering that still exists.
Tourists have not been back to the island since.
Pakistanis are sowing the seeds in a fight against deforestation. This comes as millions scattered in the hills and wooded areas around capital Islamabad with the aim of bolstering diminishing forests. More in this report.
Pakistan is on the road to counter the country's deforestation and making it lush green by planting thousands of trees. Experts warn that the country could risk losing all of its forests within the next 50 years if concrete steps are not taken to revive them. For this purpose, the Capital Development Authority and Islamabad Wildlife Management Board have launched a project, Throw and Grow.
Deforestation is becoming a huge challenge for all of us. But in the recent few years, there has been a lot of awareness on this topic, and recently the regime, the present Prime Minister, is very much particular about increasing the green cover of Pakistan. Projects like these are very important to increase awareness, number one, and number two, obviously, to increase the green cover of the city area.
Workers picked out healthy seeds and placed them in the middle of a mixture of clay and organic compost. The mixture is then rolled into a ball, forming an outer layer that protects the seeds from being eaten by animals and insects. It also provides nutrients for the seeds to grow. These seed balls are then tossed by volunteers in the wooded areas where they can germinate within 3 to 4 weeks.
We have taken 1.5 million seed balls, and every seed ball has 4 seeds. And because this area is more conducive for pine trees, so we have included 4 seeds in this one ball. And these balls are then given away to all the hikers who are coming here. They are given away to all the people who are coming there for picnic. And we've also hired our own 25 different teams who are taking these balls and they are throwing away in the areas where there are less trees.
Project Throw and Grow has been in full swing for the past 2 weeks, and officials say they have so far scattered around 1.5 million seed balls. Hundreds of hikers and picnickers have joined in the effort.
In Sweden, a gingerbread Greta Thunberg was on show at a coronavirus-inspired baking competition in Stockholm. More in this report.
The annual gingerbread competition at the Architecture and Design Museum in Stockholm is usually filled with wide-eyed children and adults marveling at the culinary creations of the nation's bakers. But this year, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spanner in the works, reflected in the 2020 theme of distance. Despite being closed, the museum received around 100 entries, which the team decided to 3D scan and publish on their website.
So what we've basically done is that we have 3D scanned all of the gingerbread houses that we normally show in this exhibition space physically, and instead we have turned them into 3D versions of themselves. So now you get to experience them as AR models that appear on your camera phone when you visit the website, basically.
Some of the nation's bakers found eye-catching ways to illustrate the year of the pandemic. In one such design, Santa chatted on Skype to 3 piglets. One baker reproduced the head of Sweden's chief epidemiologist, Anders Tegnell, to get the social distancing message across. Being Sweden, there were also 2 creations that featured teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg.
I actually had a lot more last year, so it's quite interesting that it's only 2 this year. But if we look at this first one, you can see Greta when she's traveling on the Atlantic Ocean to New York, which is a quite familiar view to the people that have been following Greta on her travels.
Other entries showed lighthouses or planets of the solar system. The winners of the various categories will be announced on Facebook on the 20th.
In the UK, the Royal Mint has quite literally launched a commemorative coin celebrating the career of David Bowie. One of the most influential musicians of his era, Bowie died of cancer in 2016, aged 69. David Bowie, the infinitely changeable songwriter who created trend-setting pop personas like Ziggy Stardust, passed away in 2016. But his legacy lives on. In a fitting tribute to the man who gave us Space Oddity, the Royal Mint launched a commemorative coin into space this October. The coin was carried by a balloon to an altitude of 35,000 meters before descending back to Britain. The design was inspired by a photo of Bowie taken during his Berlin years and features his iconic lightning bolt motif. The Bowie coin is the 3rd release in the Royal Mint's Music Legends collection. It follows similar coins in honor of Queen and Elton John. The coin, the first UK coin to be sent to space, will be offered as a competition prize via the Royal Mint's Facebook page. And now on to business news. Britain says it will suspend retaliatory tariffs imposed on U.S. goods. The Trade Department said the move was an attempt to de-escalate conflict between the U.S. and EU on subsidies for aircraft manufacturers. In a statement, Trade Minister Liz Truss said Britain wanted a negotiated settlement to the conflict. He said London is ready to deepen its trading relations with Washington. He added separate tariffs on U.S. goods relating to a row over steel and aluminum would remain in place after January 1st. The move marks UK's divergence from EU trade policy and ambition to forge closer ties with the US. But London warned it could reimpose the sanctions if an agreeable settlement was not reached. Stocks in Asia Pacific have mostly gained over vaccine rollouts and Chinese economy reporting consumer deflation for the first time in 11 years. Seoul's Kospi jumped over 1.5% to lead the gains. Japan's Nikkei 225 and Topix index have risen over 1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index has also added around 1%. Shares in Australia have inched up as the ASX 200 rises 0.5%. But mainland Chinese shares are trading lower, with both the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen Component in negative territory. And on to football. Juventus have outclassed Barcelona 3-0 in their UEFA Champions League encounter at Camp Nou. The defeat is Barcelona's first in a group fixture since 2016.
Cristiano Ronaldo scored a brace to put his club in the top spot of Group G. In a Group H fixture, RB Leipzig beat Manchester United 3-2, knocking Man U out of the tournament. Angelino, Amadou Haidara and Justin Kluivert scored one each for the Germans. In a Group E match, Chelsea drew Krasnodar 1-1 to remain atop the group with 14 points. Meanwhile, the Paris Saint-Germain and Istanbul Başakşehir encounter was rescheduled for today after the fourth official accused of racism. Players from PSG and Istanbul Başakşehir left the pitch in the 23rd minute following an incident of racism by the fourth official, Sebastian. UEFA has announced a thorough investigation.
A member of UAE's ruling family has purchased a 50% stake in Israeli Premier League team BEITAR Jerusalem. At a briefing, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Nahyan said the club was open to recruiting Arab players. Sheikh Hamad said the door was open for all talent regardless of religion or ethnicity. Many supporters of the club, known as La Familia, have been racist toward Israel's Arab minority. BEITAR has never fielded an Arab player since its founding in 1936, and Muslim players at the club also faced racist abuse in the past. The purchase comes amid a flurry of business deals between Israel and the UAE following their normalization of ties. And on to tennis, American Sofia Kenin has been named WTA Player of the Year. She won her maiden Grand Slam titles at the Australian Open. Kenin beat world number 1 Ashley Barty in the semifinals and twice Grand Slam champion Garbine Muguruza in the final in Melbourne. She also reached the French Open final and finished the season ranked a career-high number 4. The 22-year-old is the 8th American to win the accolade. France's Kristina Mladenovic and Hungary's Timea Babos were voted the WTA's Double Duo of the Year. The pair won the Australian Open and Roland Garros titles. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.